Have you ever, like, I don't know, been totally thrown off guard
Right.
by something big, like a massive change in your industry or something, or like some crazy opportunity that seemingly came out of left field, or maybe even like a huge world event, or, so something like that. And it felt like it just came out of nowhere. But then after it happened, everyone's acting like, oh yeah, the signs were there all along.
Yeah, that's it, right? That feeling when the totally unexpected just slams into you. And then, like you said, everyone kind of rewrites history to fit the narrative. And that's what we are going to dig into today.
Yeah, exactly. You sent over that book summary of The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really got me thinking differently about how we see the world and our ability to see what's come around the bend, So we're going to explore this core idea, that the most impactful events, the things that change everything, they're often the things that, we just didn't see coming.
Exactly. And right at the heart of all this is the concept of a Black Swan event. Like the book title, Taleb uses this term to describe these occurrences, these happenings that share three, key characteristics. And the first one is that they are outliers. So like totally unexpected, based on everything we know, everything we've seen before, nothing in our history really gives us a good reason to think it could happen. And second, they make a huge impact, like significantly changing how things go, changing the course of things. And then third, after they happen, we humans, we're really good at this. We explain it and make it seem like, oh yeah, it was predictable all along. Of course, the term itself, it comes from that, historical belief that all swans were white, and then bam, they found black swans in Australia.
Okay.
And that shows how just one unexpected observation can completely change what we thought was like an absolute truth. You know what I mean?
Okay, so these Black Swan events, it's more than just, I don't know, like a surprise party, right? So what is it that really defines these Black Swan events for us?
Well, the main thing to remember here is that these events, they're outliers compared to our expectations and our knowledge. Like that summary lays out, an event is a black swan if it's way beyond our usual predictions, if it has a huge impact, and then looking back, it seems a lot more predictable than it really was. And it's that last part,
Yeah.
the sense-making after the fact, that can really trick us. And we start thinking we understand the world better than we actually do.
Yeah, that illusion of predictability after the fact.
Yeah.
That's where things get really interesting, because that's kind of what keeps us from really learning from these surprises, don't you think?
I think so, yeah. Because we can always come up with a story, a plausible narrative after the fact, right? So we often don't recognize how unpredictable things actually were before the event happened. And because of that, we end up relying on past data to try and see what the future holds, which, as Taleb argues, can be really dangerous when you're dealing with black swans.
Right, which brings us to that turkey. Can you take us back to that? How does that analogy explain this whole idea?
Okay, so picture this. You got a turkey, and it's fed and taken care of every single day of its life, no worries. And based on all of its experience, hundreds of days, positive reinforcement, right? This turkey really believes that, yeah, humans, they're benevolent providers, good guys. Every day that passes just reinforces this belief.
Yeah.
And then, bam, Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
For that turkey, it's completely unexpected, devastating consequences. Its whole history, it had no clue this was coming.
Right. For the turkey, Thanksgiving is the ultimate black swan. But like the summary highlights, for the farmer, it's not unexpected at all. So really, black swans are all about what we don't know, or what we can't even imagine, based on what we know now, what we've seen before.
Exactly. The tricky analogy, it's so good because it shows how risky it can be to assume that just because things have been a certain way in the past, they'll keep going that way in the future. When you have those consistent patterns, it can create this false sense of security. And then we're completely unprepared for that big, impactful event that's just totally outside of our historical data.
Also.
And thinking about your own experiences, have you ever felt a little bit like that turkey, where everything's stable, everything's going great, and then bam, something you didn't see coming just changes everything?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It makes you think about all those areas, in our own lives and careers.
Yeah.
Where we might be making those same assumptions,
Yeah.
Like we're that turkey, just totally unaware of the potential for something big and surprising to just, shake things up.
Right.
And so the summary also talks about how our own biases play into this, right? Like as humans, we tend to focus on what we think is going to happen.
That's it. We're wired that way. It's fascinating. As humans, we tend to focus on the likely and the probable. It's like our brains have the spotlight. And that spotlight is usually focused on the familiar patterns, and predictable outcomes. And at the same time, we kind of dim the lights or we completely ignore the possibility of those extreme events, those improbable events. And because of that, our viewpoints are shaped by what we already know or what we believe. And that can really limit us. It limits our ability to even imagine those truly new scenarios, which is where black swans can come from.
And then there's that concept, the narrative fallacy. It sounds like our brains, they're always trying to create a neat story, even when things are totally random.
Exactly. It's like we have this deep need, this human need to find a cause and effect for everything, to connect the dots. And then we construct these stories, these narratives about past events. So we look back, let's say, at a huge shift in the market, and we create this seemingly logical chain of events that led up to it. And it gives us this feeling of understanding, right? But it also often downplays the role of pure chance. And we start to think that future events are going to unfold in the same predictable way. We get good at explaining the past, but not necessarily anticipating what's going to happen next.
So that desire for a clean, easy-to-understand story, it actually blinds us to how random things can be.
Yeah.
Which has to have implications for how we think about risk, right?
Yeah.
And the summary definitely has some thoughts on traditional risk management.
Yeah, it does. If we think about how we usually assess and manage risk, a lot of the traditional approaches, they fall short when it comes to black swans. Because a lot of them, they rely on those statistical models, like the bell curve, which are great for describing and predicting normal variations, but they're really designed to deal with what we expect. So they minimize or completely ignore the possibility of those big, unexpected deviations. And that's a black swan, right? A big, unexpected deviation.
Yeah, and the summary uses that analogy about crossing a river.
Oh, yeah.
With like an average depth. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, so imagine a river. And the average depth, it's 4 feet. And you might think, okay, 4 feet, I can cross that. But what if there are sections that are 10 feet deep? That average depth, it doesn't really tell you about the true risk, right? In the same way, relying only on risk management models that focus on average probabilities, on standard deviations that can give us this false sense of security. And then bam, we're exposed to something truly unexpected, something potentially catastrophic, those events that fall outside those models.
And it's not just in finance either. The summary brings up that even in areas with really strict rules, like organized sports, there can be a new tactic, something unexpected, a total game changer. Basically a black swan in that context.
Yeah, and that shows that relying just on the established protocols, on historical data, it's not enough. Because if we're only prepared for those expected threats or those expected opportunities, we're going to be vulnerable when something we didn't see coming happens. And the summary makes this point that in a lot of real-world situations, it's not like a controlled game, We don't know all the possibilities or the real probabilities. It's more like we're navigating, and black swans can suddenly appear and change the rules of the game.
Okay, so it sounds like trying to predict black swans is, well, it's not going to get us very far. So what can we actually do? How do we navigate a world where these unpredictable, high-impact events are just, part of the deal?
Right. The key is to shift our perspective. Instead of trying to predict what can't be predicted, we need to build resilience. We need to be able to adapt to the reality of black swans. Because we can't know when or how they'll happen, so we need to focus on preparing for the unexpected. Positioning ourselves to maybe benefit from those positive surprises. And the summary actually introduces this idea, serendipitous black swans. Those are the rare events that have a really positive impact.
Okay, that's a much better thought. So maybe we can't see the negative black swans coming, but we can try to create conditions where we're more likely to benefit from the positive ones.
Yes, exactly. The strategy isn't about predicting. It's about creating options, being open to opportunities. It means experimenting, trying new things, being ready to jump on anything that even looks like it could be a good opportunity.
It's a more proactive approach, right? It's less about trying to control the future and more about being ready to, just capitalize on whatever comes your way.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that negative and positive black swans, they don't have the same impact. The negative ones can hit really hard, really fast, but the positive ones, they might take time to develop, to reach their full potential. And that shows us that we need to do both. We need to mitigate the potential downside, but we also need to be patient, to be persistent in going after the upside. And the summary highlights this. Fields like venture capital, scientific discovery, the arts, a few big successes can lead to huge rewards. Even if at first, those successes seemed unlikely.
So it's like making smart bets where the potential payoff is really big, even if initially the chances don't seem that great.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. It's maximizing the chances for those positive black swans while also managing the risks from the negative ones. But besides actively looking for those beneficial surprises, the summary also talks about how important it is to control our own reaction to any unexpected event, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, that makes sense. We don't have a ton of control over what happens to us, but we can control how we react. That example in the summary about missing a train, that really stuck with me.
That's such a good example because the frustration, the stress we feel when we miss a train, it's not just from the missed connection itself. It's mostly our emotional reaction, right? But if we can detach ourselves from those immediate negative emotions and focus on finding solutions, well, we can really reduce the impact of those little unexpected events.
And that connects to, defining our own way of measuring success. And well-being. Instead of letting things that happen outside of us control how we feel and how much control we feel we have.
Exactly. And Taleb has this great quote. He says, "You have far more control over your life if you decide on your criterion by yourself." And what that means is we don't have to be passive, just accepting whatever happens. We can actively shape our own perspective, our responses to uncertainty. And on a more practical level, the summary talks about portfolio diversification and asset allocation. It even mentions mutual funds as ways to protect ourselves from those extreme market events.
Okay, so to recap, Black Swan events, those are the rare, high-impact surprises that usually only make sense after they've already happened. And because we naturally look for patterns and rely on past data, we're often vulnerable to these black swans. And the traditional risk management tools, well, they're not always equipped to deal with them.
Right. And we can't forget about those human biases. We want to see predictability, and we're often overconfident in what we know, and those can be major blind spots. And we need to remember that randomness plays a huge role in how things happen, so we need to shift our focus. Instead of trying to predict what we can't know, we should focus on building strong systems and having a mindset of resilience.
So the real power is not in trying to see the future, but in being able to handle those unexpected storms.
Right.
And even, being ready to take advantage of those rare positive surprises when they pop up.
Exactly. So here's a final thought for you to consider. Our world is shaped by these unpredictable black swan events. So what if, instead of always trying to predict and control everything, we intentionally embraced uncertainty? What new and amazing possibilities might that open up? In your own life, in your own work.
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, that's our deep dive for today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun.
I'll see you next time.
Sounds good.